Okay, so like, have you ever felt like there are just way too many rules out there? Like, honestly, who decided we couldn't wear socks with sandals?
Well, it's funny because a lot of those rules, especially like the older ones, they usually weren't just random.
Yeah.
They were actually tied to people's beliefs and values and like
Mm.
how their society worked back then.
That's interesting.
So if we try to understand those old rules, it
Mm.
can actually give us like a window into human behavior and stuff that's still relevant today, even.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into it.
Right.
We're diving into the book of Leviticus this time.
hmm
And from what I've heard, it sounds like things get pretty intense with this story of Nadab and Abihu.
Oh, yeah, definitely. In Leviticus chapter 10, we see Nadab and Abihu, who were the sons of Aaron the high priest,
Okay.
and they were offering what's called strange fire before the Lord.
Strange fire. What is that all about?
Right, so they were acting as priests, like carrying out these sacred duties.
Yeah.
But this unauthorized act, this strange fire thing, it had some pretty serious consequences.
Okay, so what was so strange about this fire anyway? Like, was it a different kind of fire?
Not really. It wasn't like the fire itself that was the problem.
Okay.
It was more about them deviating from God's instructions for offerings. Like, he had given very specific guidelines.
So it's like there's a protocol you have to follow.
Exactly. And their actions weren't just about, lighting a fire.
Right.
It represented like a disregard for those boundaries, a violation of the divine order, you could say.
So it's more about respecting the proper way of doing things, especially when it comes to something as sacred as a religious ritual.
Exactly. It really emphasizes how important reverence and obedience to a higher authority are and, the consequences that come with straying from that path.
And those consequences were pretty severe, weren't they? I mean, we're talking Old Testament here.
Oh, yeah. Nadab and Abihu were consumed by divine fire,
Whoa.
and they died right there in the sanctuary. So it was a pretty powerful message about the seriousness of their actions.
Wow. That's heavy stuff. It really makes you think about how even something that might seem like a small act of disobedience can have huge repercussions, especially when you're dealing with something sacred.
Absolutely.
But what about Aaron? I mean, can you imagine losing your sons like that? That must have been devastating.
It's hard to even fathom, right? But what's interesting is that Aaron was told to continue his priestly duties without any outward mourning.
Like no time to grieve.
Yeah,
That seems a little harsh.
I know it might seem that way to us,
Yeah.
but it speaks to the level of discipline and composure expected of someone in such a sacred role.
Yeah.
Like his personal tragedy couldn't interfere with the responsibility of carrying out those duties.
So like there's a separation
Yeah.
between your personal life and this sacred duty, right? You got
Yeah.
to keep those things separate.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And, this idea of having boundaries and respecting what's sacred,
Right.
well, it's not just some ancient concept. It actually applies to our modern lives in some pretty powerful ways, too.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that.
Like, think about it for a second. What are some areas in our lives today where following rules and protocols is super important?
Well, healthcare's like the first thing that pops into my head.
Right.
Like one wrong dosage or you mess up a procedure and it could be disastrous.
Exactly. Or think about law enforcement or people operating heavy machinery or even air traffic control. Like, there's a reason those jobs have such strict rules.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's not about being like a rule stickler,
Yeah.
It's recognizing that certain actions have huge implications and there are boundaries in place for a reason.
Right. It's like that one little decision to deviate from the norm, and it could have all these crazy ripple effects.
Yeah, exactly, like that butterfly effect thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And the story of Nadab and Abihu, even though it's an ancient one, it reminds us that good intentions or small actions, they don't matter if you don't respect the boundaries because it can lead to some serious consequences.
Okay. I'm starting to see how this old story actually connects to our lives. But what about that idea of honoring what's sacred to others? That feels a little more abstract, harder to define.
It is, but it's super important. So think about this. What are some things that people consider sacred in today's world?
Well, religious beliefs are obviously a big one, but also things like personal values, different cultural traditions, even someone's personal space. Things that are really core to who they are.
Exactly. And just like Nadab and Abihu offering that unauthorized fire was like a big sign of disrespect, we can kind of offer strange fire in modern ways too.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Like we might disregard what someone else holds dear, whether it's making light of their beliefs, dismissing their cultural practices, or even just not being sensitive to their boundaries.
So it's about being mindful and recognizing that what might seem totally harmless to me could actually be offensive to someone else, because we all have different backgrounds and different things that are sacred to us.
Exactly. And when we don't acknowledge and respect those boundaries, those things that other people hold dear, we erode trust and damage relationships and just create unnecessary friction.
So maybe those ancient rules, those boundaries, they weren't so arbitrary after all.
Yeah.
It's about respect,
Yeah.
responsibility, and knowing your boundaries. Those are values that never go out of style, right?
Absolutely. And that's what's so cool about studying these ancient texts and stories.
Yeah.
They offer insights into human nature and how we interact with each other. And those insights are just as relevant today as they were back then.
It really makes you wonder what other old ideas or rules that we think are outdated might actually still have value if we took the time to understand them.
That's a great point. And that's what we're all about here on the deep dive.
Right.
Taking those deep dives, exploring the connections, and finding those timeless truths.
And that's what we're going to keep doing right after this quick break. All right, we're back.
Yep.
And I got to say, this whole strange fire thing, it's really got me thinking. Yeah, like I'm thinking about all those times I might have like accidentally stepped on someone's toes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think we've all been there. It's tough, right? Like we're always trying to navigate these social situations, and sometimes it's hard to know where the line is.
Exactly. It's like, how do we even know when we're offering that strange fire? Sometimes it feels like there's so much gray area.
There is definitely some gray area, but I think that's where awareness is key, you know?
Right.
Like just taking a second to think about the context and the other person's perspective, like
Right.
asking yourself, could this be hurtful, even if I don't mean it that way?
It's like checking your intentions and really trying to understand how your words or actions might affect someone else, even if you had good intentions.
Exactly. And it's not about being perfect or walking on eggshells all the time, because we're all human and we're going to mess up sometimes.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But I think the more we think about boundaries and respect for what others hold sacred, the better we'll be at navigating those tricky situations and building good relationships.
So it's not just about avoiding awkward moments or saying the wrong thing. It's about having that deeper respect and understanding in everything we do.
Exactly. And it's pretty amazing how these ancient stories and lessons can still apply to us today, you know?
Right. It's like we're tapping into some ancient wisdom about human nature and figuring out how it fits into our modern world.
Yeah, and that's what's so cool about it. These stories and lessons can still guide us and challenge us to grow both as individuals and as a society.
So as we wrap up this deep dive on Nadab and Abihu and this whole idea of strange fire, what's one big takeaway you hope our listeners will remember?
I think the most important thing to remember is that respect, responsibility, and awareness. They're not just ideas, they're choices we make every single day.
Yeah.
And those choices are the foundation for building a world where we can all get along and truly understand and appreciate each other's viewpoints and values.
Well said.
Right.
And as always, we love hearing from you, our listeners. What are some examples of modern strange fire that you've come across in your own lives? And how did you handle those situations? Share your stories and thoughts with us on social media using the hashtag #DeepDiveLeviticus.
And hey, you never know. We might even feature some of your responses in a future episode. So keep those thoughts coming and keep exploring those deeper connections.
And that's a wrap on another deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.